Alright guys, Murph's here, and today I want to talk about what makes the Winchester Model 1200 so different from other shotguns, specifically in its lockup system. Now I kind of talked about this sort of lightly in the actual video and review that I did on the Winchester Model 1200, but I thought it might be more interesting to kind of do a deep dive into what makes this different from everything else. So for that, I pulled out a couple of different guns, well, at least parts of a couple of different guns, in order to be able to better display how this bolt works and why it's so interesting, at least to me. Maybe you find it interesting as well. All right, so with that, the vast majority of shotguns out of the market have a very simple locking system overall. Now, especially modern produced shotguns pretty much all use alloy receivers. One of the things you have to keep in mind with locking lugs is that steel locking lugs mating into alloy receivers is not going to be a long-term successful result. At some point, that receiver is going to start to degrade. Even if you never fired around, even if you just cycled the action a bunch, eventually that steel locking lug is going to degrade the integrity of the receiver, let alone if you add pressures to it, if you actually start firing rounds out of it. So with that being the case, shotgun barrels, this being the barrel off of my Mossberg Model 500, all tacticaled out here, but shotgun barrels have a steel receiver that, or excuse me, a steel extension that comes down into the receiver, and this is where actual lockup occurs. So here is my Mossberg Model 500 bolt. As we can see here, we have a single, very large locking lug that comes out of the top of the bolt. So the slide brings the bolt into battery, so it comes into engagement with the barrel extension into the receiver, and that locking lug comes up into its actual locking surface in the barrel. That is how the vast majority of shotguns out on the market achieve lockup. However, that is not how the Winchester Model 1200 works. And this is where things get interesting. This is the bolt out of a Winchester Model 1200. As we can see here, we have a screw on the bottom of it. This has to be removed in order to be able to take the bolt apart. However, it's also very important as you're sitting here handling the bolt that you put it back in. We'll talk about that more here in just a moment. Now, so we can see here we have a very different design than what you commonly find in your other shotguns out on the market. If we note here, we have a round bolt face that moves. And not only does it move, but it rotates. Okay, so how does this system work and why does it differ from everything else? Well, if we take a look at this, this is my 12 gauge Winchester Model 1200. If we take a look at our barrel extension here that comes into the receiver, we see that we have locking recesses there. So how this system works is you bring the slide back, it's going to scoop around up off of the lifter as it comes into battery, and then you're going to bring this thing into battery. It's going to match up in between the locking lugs here, and then as you bring it all the way forward into battery, it rotates. Really not that different from an AR-15 bolt. So we can see here, this is actually a piston-driven AR bolt. So we have our rotating bolt head and our bolt carrier. Same type of deal in this particular bolt. We just have a couple of extra parts, and we'll talk about that more here in a moment. So here is our bolt, here is our bolt carrier. Now, what's important and individual about this, even from the AR-15 rotating bolt, go ahead and take out the screw real quick. Quick being a relative term in this case. So the screw holds this locking plate in place. And this is important because once I take off this locking plate, you shoot things across the room. All right, here we go. So once I take off this locking plate, this spring wants to push the firing pin out of the back of the bolts. So this is how it's supposed to go together. And now this is the bolt moving freely because there is no spring. So when this shotgun goes into the locked, it locks in the battery, goes in the locked position, the spring is under tension. And then the trigger mechanism is what's holding that tension onto the shotgun, because all pump action shotguns have to either be fired in order to be able to cycle the action, or you have to depress the lever on the side of the shotgun. That lever is in different locations. This is my 16 gauge Winchester Model 1200. As we can see, on this side of the shotgun is our release button in order to be able to cycle the action. Once I've cycled the action, have not fired the shotgun, I cannot open it. Now, place it on fire, pull the trigger, and now I can cycle the action. So that's what's keeping that bolt in its compressed state, right? So that lockup occurs. Now you pull the trigger, and now that there's nothing holding this bolt in place, it wants to spring out. It wants to push itself out of battery. And this is actually what causes malfunctions in the Winchester Model 1200. So it's something that I've noticed a lot lately because, I mean, I've been shooting these shotguns all my life, but I've changed up pretty much every way that I shoot guns now that I've grown up. And when it comes to rifles and any long guns and all that kind of stuff, I'm pulling the gun into my body in order to be able to maintain a stable shooting platform and all that kind of stuff. When you do that with the Winchester Model 1200, in conjunction with releasing the tension on this bolt and allowing that spring to want to go back to its relaxed state, you wind up prematurely opening the action. Now, all repeating firearm systems are built around a concept of timing. Now, it's far more important in semi-automatic systems because we're talking about hundredths of a second when it comes to timing. And for most people, that hundredths of a second time period is covered in the time that it takes for them to decide to cycle the action in bolt actions, lever actions, pump actions, all those types of guns. However, when you have something under spring tension that is wanting to automatically jump as soon as tension is released, you change that dynamic. So what's been happening with me with these shotguns has been that primary extraction with me putting tension on the slide action as I'm bringing the shotgun into my shoulder. As soon as the shot breaks, I am facilitating the spring wanting to jump out of battery. So with that being the case, the action is opening at a time when the cartridge casing is still inflated with pressure from the just fired round. So that is causing me to hook onto the base of the shell and nearly pull the primer and the lip of the cartridge casing off of the shotgun hull overall. That's what's causing that issue there. So I found that as soon as I started pulling forward on the handguard, that issue kind of went away. And I can roll in some video of that real quick. All right, so with that being the case, whenever I'm pulling back, you can see there, I'm not even firing live rounds. I'm just putting tension on this handguard, and pulling the trigger allowed me the ability to be able to start cycling this action. You can see how that can cause some malfunctions prematurely. So the important thing that you have to do is to kind of pull forward with this hand and pull back against your semi-pistol grip with this hand in order to be able to keep this shotgun from malfunctioning. Now, in AR-15s, this dynamic's a little bit different overall. So we have our rotating bolt. We can see the cam moving in the slot right there. So in this case, an operating rod comes back and strikes this portion here. In a gas gun, you would have gases come down through the gas key into the expansion chamber in the bolt carrier. So regardless, some sort of impetus for movement hits here. And then the bolt carrier starts moving back. The cam here causes this bolt to rotate and unlock so that the bolt, once it hits the limit of its motion, can come back with the bolt carrier. Then the buffer spring in the receiver extension gets compressed by the movement of the bolt and then slings it back into position. The locking lugs catch into the chamber, turn the cam slot, turn the cam pin like that, and then lock into their recesses, and then it has tension on the back of the bolt in order to be able to keep it in place. That is how this bolt is similar to the Winchester Model 1200 bolt is similar to that of the AR-15. As we can see here, we do have a cam slot as well, kind of a zigzag slot going on here. Now this bolt, as far as I've been able to figure out, does not come apart any further than this. So the bolt and bolt carrier are permanently attached, but they are pretty much the same parts overall. All right, guys. That's actually pretty much what I had on this particular subject. I hope you found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.